I was sitting silently on a phone call my husband believed had already ended when I heard him laugh and say the words that ended our marriage. "Don't worry," he said. "By the time I'm done with this divorce, I'll take her to the cleaners. She has absolutely no idea what's coming." He was talking to his own brother. He thought it was just the two of them left on the line. He had no idea that the her he was so cheerfully planning to financially destroy was still sitting there, muted, on the very same call, hearing every single word. I did not gasp. I did not hang up. I put my hand over my mouth, and I stood very still in my own kitchen, and I listened to my husband of 14 years describe, casually, almost gleefully, to his own brother, how he was going to leave me with nothing. And here is what I need you to understand before I tell you the rest, because it's the whole shape of this story. What I heard on that call was shocking, but it turned out to be only the very tip of it. I thought, in that first moment, that I'd simply overheard a cruel man talking big to his brother. Over the next several weeks, I discovered that the cleaners' plan was already real, already quietly in motion, and far larger, colder, and more advanced than anything he'd said out loud. This is the story of how I found the entire iceberg sitting underneath that one overheard sentence and made sure the only person who got taken to the cleaners was the one who had spent months planning it. But before I take you under the surface, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. Have you ever accidentally overheard something you were never supposed to hear, a sentence that rearranged everything you thought you knew in a single second? What was it, and what did you do? Be honest, because everything I have today I owe to one phone call I forgot to hang up. Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. And before we go under the surface, I want to say one thing to anyone watching who has had a moment like that, the accidental sentence, the message on a screen you weren't meant to see, the overheard line, and has been carrying it ever since, unsure what to do. First, you are not crazy, and you did not imagine it. The mind tries hard to talk us out of these moments, because believing them means our life has to change. But you heard what you heard. Second, you do not have to act this second. The worst thing you can do with a moment of accidental truth is to spend it immediately, in a burst of confrontation, before you understand what it's connected to. Hold it. Breathe. Look quietly at what's underneath it. The truth that arrives by accident is fragile in your hands at first, and the calmer you stay, the more it can grow into something that actually protects you. Let me tell you exactly how I ended up on that call, because it was the most ordinary thing in the world. That morning, Glenn and I had been on a family conference call together, the three of us, me, Glenn, and his brother, sorting out some boring logistics about a relative's upcoming visit. Nothing unusual. And when the official part wrapped up, I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, on mute, half listening, distracted by something on the stove, and I simply forgot to actually hang up. The call was still live. I was still on it, silent, invisible, and Glenn on his end clearly assumed I'd dropped off. Because the moment he thought it was just him and his brother, his whole voice changed. It got loose, confident, the voice of a man speaking freely to family, with no one he needed to manage listening in. I want to pause on that change in his voice, because it has haunted me ever since, and I think it carries a lesson worth sitting with. For 14 years, I had only ever heard Glenn's managed voice, the version of him calibrated for me, warm and reassuring and careful. I had assumed, the way you do, that the managed voice was simply who he was. And then, for the length of one forgotten phone call, I heard the unmanaged one, the voice he used when he thought I wasn't in the room, and they were two completely different men. The second man was a stranger to me, and he had been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, for years. Here is what I took from that. Everyone has a voice they use when they think the person they're discussing can't hear. And if you ever, by accident, get to hear someone's unmanaged voice talking about you, believe it completely. That is the truer one. The performance is the one they put on for your benefit. What they say when they think you're gone is what they actually think. Except someone was listening in. Me, now here is the first small piece of the iceberg, the chip floating on the surface. Because what he said first, before the cleaner's line, was about a woman named Crystal. The warmth in his voice when he said her name. The way his brother clearly already knew exactly who she was. In about 4 seconds, 14 years of marriage rearranged itself in my mind, and I understood that my husband was having an affair, and that it was not a secret to his family, only to me. That detail that his family already knew was its own small devastation, separate from the affair itself. Because it meant the betrayal wasn't just Glenn's. It was a quiet conspiracy of comfortable silence. His brother knew. Who else? The casual way they discussed Crystal told me this wasn't a confession. It was an old, familiar topic between them. Something they'd talked about many times. Which meant that for who knows how long I had been sitting at family dinners, smiling at people who knew exactly what was being done to me and had decided it wasn't their business to say. There is a special kind of loneliness in discovering that you were the last to know something everyone around you had already accepted. But I didn't let myself sink into it, because that loneliness, if I'd indulged it, would have made me reckless. And reckless was the one thing I could not afford to be. I filed the hurt away to feel properly later, and I kept my eyes on the only thing that mattered, protecting myself. That alone would have been enough to end a marriage, but it was just the surface. Because then came the cleaners. "She has no idea what's coming," he said, about me. And he laughed. If your stomach just dropped imagining hearing your husband laugh about destroying you to his own brother, while you sat there silent and unseen, do me one quick favor before I tell you what was underneath it all. Tap like and subscribe to the channel. I'm not asking for nothing. These calm, slow burn revenge stories get buried by the algorithm unless people actually engage. And your one tap is the only reason the next one reaches a woman who is, tonight, overhearing something she'll never be able to unhear. And believe me, the iceberg beneath that phone call is the part you came for. Now here is the single most important decision I made in this entire story. And I made it with my hand still over my mouth, the call still live in my ear. I did not make a sound. I did not let him know I was there. I let the call end naturally on his side, and then I quietly hung up mine, and I sat down at my kitchen counter, shaking. The room very quiet around me, and I made myself a promise. I would not say one word about what I had heard. Not yet. Because in that moment, I understood, with total clarity, that the single greatest advantage I would ever have was this: Glenn believed his plan was a secret. He believed I had no idea what was coming. And as long as he believed that, he would keep building it carelessly, out in the open, right in front of a woman he thought was asleep at the wheel of her own life. I have thought a great deal about why staying silent was so hard and so important. And I keep coming back to this. The overheard call gave me an almost unbearable urge to be right out loud. There is a particular fury that comes from knowing someone has been laughing at you behind your back. And that fury wants, more than anything, to wipe the smugness off their face, to say, "I heard you. I know everything. You're not as clever as you think." That impulse is completely human. It is also completely self-destructive. Because the instant I said those words, Glenn would stop being a careless, confident man and become a careful, frightened one. He'd move the rest of the money where I couldn't follow it. He'd accelerate his lawyer. He'd close every window I'd just discovered was open. My one fleeting moment of satisfaction would cost me every advantage I had. So I made the hardest trade there is. I swallowed the urge to be right, in exchange for the chance to actually be safe. And I'd make that trade again 1,000 times. Being right feels good for an evening. Being protected lasts the rest of your life. So I became, outwardly, exactly the unsuspecting wife he believed me to be. And underneath, I started very quietly to dive to find out how much of "I'll take her to the cleaners" was a brag, and how much was already real. And piece by cold piece, over the following weeks, the iceberg surfaced. The first piece, I checked our finances, really checked them, with clear and open eyes, for the first time in years. And I found that money had already begun, quietly, to move. Small amounts at first, easy to miss, transferred into accounts I didn't have full visibility into. It had been happening quietly for months. The plan wasn't new. It wasn't a sudden decision. It had a history, and the history went back further than I wanted to believe. The second piece, a name on a document. Glenn, it turned out, had already consulted a divorce attorney months before that phone call. The man who was acting like a happily married husband at our dinner table, who kissed me goodnight and asked about my day, had been for half a year quietly building a legal strategy against me. The cleaner's remark wasn't a sudden cruel thought. It was a status update on a project already well underway. The third piece, and this was the coldest, I began to see the narrative he'd been constructing. Little comments he'd made to our mutual friends, painting me as financially careless, as checked out, as the difficult one seeds planted over months so that when the divorce came, the story would already be told, and I would already be the villain in it. He hadn't just been hiding money. He'd been hiding money while quietly building the case for why he deserved to. That third piece, the narrative, was in some ways the most chilling of all, and I want to name why, because it's a tactic more common than people realize. Hiding money is a financial crime against a marriage, but quietly seeding a false story about your spouse, painting her as careless, unstable, checked out. To mutual friends and family, months before you make your move is something colder. It's preloading the jury. It's making sure that when the marriage finally, publicly ends, everyone already has the explanation ready. Of course it ended. She was difficult. She was a mess. Poor Glenn. He wasn't just planning to take my money. He was planning to take my reputation, my version of events, my standing among the people we both knew, so that I would have nothing left to push back with, not even the truth. Because the truth would already sound like sour grapes from the woman everyone had been told was the problem. Discovering that was the moment my grief over the marriage finished turning into something harder and clearer. You can mourn a man who fell out of love with you. It is very difficult to mourn a man who was methodically building a story in which you were the villain of your own destruction. Here is the thing about a slow burn iceberg, the thing that makes it so much more frightening than a single betrayal. A single betrayal is a wound. A plan like Glenn's is an architecture built patiently, over months, beneath the surface of an ordinary marriage, by someone who smiles at you across the breakfast table while a structure designed to destroy you grows quietly underneath. The deeper I dove, the larger it got, and the more clearly I understood that the cheerful, confident man on that phone call had not been exaggerating at all. He fully intended to take me to the cleaners. He'd simply made one mistake. He'd let me hear about it before he was ready. And the more I understood the scale of what he'd built, the calmer, strangely, I became, and I want to explain that. Because it's counterintuitive. You might think that discovering the plan was even bigger and colder than the phone call would have terrified me, sent me spiraling. Instead, it steadied me, because clarity is steadying even when what you're seeing clearly is terrible. As long as I'd only had the overheard sentence, I was working with a fragment, and fragments breed panic. Your mind races, fills in blanks, imagines 100 versions. But once I could see the whole structure, dated and documented, I knew exactly what I was up against. There was no more guessing. There was only a known problem with known dimensions that I could now methodically solve. Fear lives in the unknown. The fastest way out of fear is not to look away from the thing that scares you, but to look at all of it, directly, until you understand its actual size. The iceberg was enormous, but an enemy you can see in full is far less frightening than one you can only glimpse. I'd add one more thing to that. For anyone watching who senses, right now, that something underneath their own life isn't right, but is afraid to look directly at it. I understand the fear. There is a part of all of us that would rather not know, that prefers the comfortable surface to the cold water underneath. Because once you've seen the iceberg, you can never unsee it, and your life will have to change. But please hear me. Not looking does not make the iceberg smaller. It only means you'll hit it without warning, at full speed, with no time to turn. The kindest thing you can do for your future self is to be brave enough to look now, calmly, while you still have time to steer. Knowledge is not the thing that hurts you. The collision you never saw coming is. I am grateful every single day that one forgotten phone call forced me to look because it gave me the one thing Glenn never meant to give me: time. So now I had seen the whole iceberg, and I had to decide what to do with the fact that I'd seen it. I want to be very clear about what I did not do, because it matters. I did not confront him. I did not scream, "I heard you on the phone." I did not throw the affair in his face, because the overheard call, as shocking as it was not my weapon, it was my warning. It was the alarm that woke me up in time. The actual work, the work that would protect me, was everything I did after the alarm, quietly, lawfully, and completely. So I did 3 things, calmly, over the following weeks. And I want to walk you through them, not because your situation will be identical to mine, but because the shape of what worked is the same shape that works again and again. See clearly, document honestly, and move only when you are ready, never when you are angry. First, I documented properly. Not the phone call, which was simply the thing that opened my eyes, but the real, hard, lawful evidence underneath it. The money that had been moving, traced and dated. The financial records he assumed I never looked at. The full, true picture of our marital assets, gathered carefully while he still believed I was oblivious. He had spent months building a hidden plan. I spent weeks building a complete and honest record, which is a very different and much stronger thing. I want to dwell on that difference, because it became the whole foundation of how this ended. A hidden plan is, by its nature, fragile. It depends on concealment. The moment it's exposed, it doesn't just fail, it actively backfires. Because the concealment itself becomes evidence of bad faith. An honest record is the opposite. It has nothing to fear from light. It can be looked at by anyone, a lawyer, a judge, my husband himself, and it only gets stronger the more carefully it's examined. Because it's simply true. Glenn had built his entire strategy out of the most brittle possible material: secrets. I built mine out of the most durable: facts. And when those 2 things finally collided across a kitchen table, it was not a close contest. Secrets shatter on contact with documentation. That is why, over and over in these stories, the person who stays calm and gathers the truth defeats the person who schemes in the dark. It isn't luck, and it isn't even cleverness, really. It's that the truth is just a stronger building material than a lie, and it always has been. Second, I got my own lawyer, a good one. And I walked in not as a panicked, blindsided wife, but as a prepared woman with a clear head and an organized file, who happened to know exactly what her husband was planning before he'd planned to reveal it. And my lawyer, after she looked at everything, told me 3 things I will never forget. The first, do you understand the gift you've been given? Most people in your position find out their spouse has been hiding assets after the divorce starts, when it's almost too late to do anything. You found out before he made his move. You have time, and you have a documented head start. That changes everything. The second, she explained that a spouse who has been quietly moving and concealing marital money in preparation for a divorce is in a very weak position the moment that concealment is documented and brought into the light, and that his secret strategy, far from taking me to the cleaners, had actually been busy building the exact case that would protect me. Hidden assets, once found and proven, don't stay hidden, and they don't reward the person who hid them. And the third thing she said, quietly, let him keep thinking he's winning. Let him make his confident first move, right on schedule, believing you know nothing. And then we simply turn on the lights. There is no stronger position than being completely prepared while the other person thinks you're asleep. So that is exactly what I did. I waited. I played the unsuspecting wife while Glenn, blissfully confident, continued building his careful little plan, adding to the iceberg, never once suspecting that the woman across the table had already mapped the entire thing. And when he finally made his move, when Glenn finally sat me down with the rehearsed, gentle, condescending speech of a man who believes he holds every card, and told me he wanted a divorce, and began, so generously, to explain how simple he wanted to keep it, I let him finish. I let him lay out the whole confident vision of how this was going to go, the generous man. The simple ending. The wife who would surely just sign where she was told. And then, when he was finished, I slid a folder across the table. Inside was the iceberg, the moved money, traced, the true picture of our assets, the documentation that turned his simple, amicable divorce, the one where he quietly kept everything he'd hidden, into a divorce where every dollar he'd squirreled away came back into the light to be counted. I watched the confidence drain out of his face as he understood what he was looking at. The cleaner's plan. The one he'd laughed about to his brother. The one he was so sure I had no idea about sitting documented in a folder, held by the woman he'd been so certain was asleep. I didn't gloat. I said the only sentence I had prepared. I said, Glenn, you told your brother you'd take me to the cleaners and that I had no idea what was coming. You were half right. You really shouldn't have left me on the call. The look on his face when I said that sentence is something I will keep for the rest of my life, not out of cruelty, but because it was the precise moment the entire balance of 14 years finally tipped. He had spent that whole conversation as the man in control, the generous architect of a tidy ending, and in the space of one sentence, he understood 3 things at once: that I knew about the call, that I'd known for weeks, and that everything he'd carefully built in the dark had been quietly photographed, dated, and assembled by the very person he was sure couldn't see him. He opened his mouth, and nothing came out, because there was nothing to say. You can argue with an accusation. You cannot argue with a folder. He had written this entire ending himself, brag by brag and transfer by transfer, and now he was simply being handed the bill. The divorce was not the divorce Glenn had spent 6 months planning. It couldn't be, because the entire plan depended on me not knowing, and I had known almost from the beginning. The hidden money was found and counted. The narrative he'd built collapsed the moment the documented truth came out. The man who'd promised to take me to the cleaners walked away with far less than he'd schemed for, and I walked away with a fair, clean settlement, and the quiet, complete satisfaction of a woman who'd turned one overheard sentence into her entire defense. My lawyer told me afterward that she rarely saw a case come together so cleanly, and she asked how I'd kept so calm through all of it. I told her the same thing I'll tell you. I wasn't calm, because it didn't hurt. It hurt more than anything in my life. I was calm because I had decided, in the first 10 seconds of that phone call, that I would not let the man who was trying to destroy me also provoke me into destroying my own case. My calm was not peace. It was discipline. And discipline, it turns out, beats a head start every time. Crystal, I'm told, was somewhat less enchanted with Glenn once the great financial future he'd promised her turned into a divorce, where his hidden money had all been counted and divided. There's not much romance in a man whose master plan was undone by a phone he forgot to check. I'll be honest about the quieter feeling underneath the victory, because these stories can make it sound like triumph and nothing else, and that wouldn't be true. Mostly, when it was over, I felt a deep and weary sadness, not for the loss of Glenn, but for the loss of the man I'd thought Glenn was. For 14 years, I had built my life on a foundation that turned out to be a performance, and discovering that didn't just end a marriage, it rewrote a history. Every happy memory now had a question mark over it. Was that real? Or was that the managed voice? That's the part no settlement repairs. But here is what I've learned to hold alongside the sadness. And it's the reason I can tell this story now without bitterness. I would rather know the truth and have grieved a fiction than live the rest of my life inside a lie someone else was writing for me. He took 14 years. He did not get to take the next 40. The day I walked out of that marriage with my dignity and my fair share intact was the day my real life, the one nobody was secretly plotting against, finally began. And if you'll let me leave you with one thing, not just as someone who got revenge, but as a woman who found out the truth because of one forgotten phone call, it's this. Pay attention to the moments the universe hands you the truth, because they come more often than you'd think, and they are almost always quiet. An overheard sentence, a document left out, a number that doesn't add up. The temptation, when the truth arrives, is to react immediately, loudly, to let the other person know you know. Resist it. The truth is a gift, but only if you have the patience to use it instead of spend it. Stay calm. Look underneath. Find the whole iceberg before you ever let on that you saw the tip. The people who truly love you are not on the phone with their brother, laughing about destroying you. The ones who have just told you exactly who they are, and if you're calm enough and quiet enough, you can use what they've shown you to walk away whole. There's one more thing, though. After the divorce, going through the financial records as I closed everything out, I found something in the trail of that moved money that revealed Glenn had not started planning his exit 6 months before the phone call, as I'd thought. He'd started years earlier, and the trail led to a secret that explained things about our entire marriage I had never let myself question. What I uncovered about how long this had really been going on, and what I did once I understood it, is a story entirely its own. And it might just be the most satisfying one yet. It's right there on your screen. You are going to want to see how that one ends.